Katerina Zisaki. I am a Quality and Regulatory Director at PKNM Solutions, which is a consulting firm established in Switzerland. So based on my background, I will give this presentation as agreed with Konstantina earlier on, Professor Konstantinidis and Professor Bamidis. So starting my presentation, because I guess that most of you are not dealing with medical device from the regulatory point of view. I would like just to emphasize why the so-called CE certification, which is the regulatory framework for European regulatory system, why do we need this CE certification and what does it mean? The so-called CE mark claims actually that the product meets all the general safety and performance requirements which have been adapted by European medical device regulations, which are two, we will see in later stages. And it outlines, as we say, the safety and the performance, meaning that we need the so-called CE mark into our label because this CE mark means that our product, it is safe and it is performed according to the European regulatory requirements. Nevertheless, there are not only the 27 countries of Europe, of European Union, the 27 countries of the member states that they adapt the European regulation, but there are also other countries that they take these regulations as granted, which can be Norway, Iceland, Switzerland, Turkey, Serbia, and other countries around the world, not only in Europe. So that means that these regulations are recognized by other also regulatory authorities. And when we have a CE mark, it is not only the 27 member states that we can sell our product. Of course, according to additional requirements. Having said so, I think that it is quite useful for you all to provide the terminology and the definition of a medical device. This terminology comes from the Article 2 of the Medical Device Regulation, and medical device means anything. It can be anything. It can be an instrument, it can be a standalone software, it can be an implant, it can be a process, it can be a reagent, it can be an article, that all of them should have at least one of the medical purposes defined into the medical device regulation, meaning that they have either to diagnose, prevent, monitor, predict, prognose, or treat a disease, or to compensate and alleviate an injury or disability, or investigate, modify, or monitor any physiological or pathological state, or by providing an in vitro examination of specimens derived from human body that but by which they may be assisted in its function. Even devices that they control or support the conceptions, meaning like in vitro fertilization, for example, or products specifically for cleaning and disinfection, they may be also medical devices. Medical devices are also considered the in vitro diagnostics by another regulation, the so-called IVDR regulations, which are the two different regulations in medical devices currently in Europe. The in vitro diagnostic regulation defines as in vitro medical device anything that can be also an instrument, an apparatus, just a piece, just a software, a reagent, a material, anything that has the purpose that, first of all, it examines specimens which are derived from human body, and they are there either to concern a physiological or pathological process, to concern congenital and physical mental impairments, to concern predisposition, or to determine the safety or compatibility, to predict treatment response or reactions, or to define or monitor therapeutic measurements. So there is a really wide area of products, especially nowadays that the technology, it really goes beyond the state of the art, that they can be fallen into these two terms. And only in this case, we can consider that a product, the so-called pure product or future product, can be considered as a medical device. Having said so, I would like to mention that the medical device regulation and the in vitro diagnostic regulation, they are European laws, meaning that they are laws for all the 27 member states, meaning that if the intended purpose of a product that we try to design or to develop, if falls into these definitions, then they, by default, they are either medical device or in vitro diagnostic medical device. As at a glance, I would like you just to provide which are the so-called CE certification. What do I need for having a CE certificate? First of all, as I said, the product should have an intended purpose that falls into the definition of medical device or in vitro diagnostic regulation. And if so, then the manufacturer, the legal manufacturer, should be which should be a legal entity that has the responsibility of the product into the market, should have a quality management system, and the quality management system according to the requirements of the regulations. However, the regulation recognizes the ISO 13485 as an harmonized standard, so should develop and design a quality management system according to this standard, or of course to adapt also some additional requirements imposed by these regulations. The product should be accompanied by a technical documentation which defines all the characteristics of the product, should provide also a rationale of the product's classification, and should provide also conformity of the assessment to GSPR. Of course, these three bullets, they can be translated into thousands of pages that they are needed in order to provide conformity, compliance to these requirements. At the end, and in the most of the cases, a notified body should be required as well. What is a notified body? When we compile the QMS and the technical documentation, there should be a body that should assess this product conformity. For class 1, for medical devices, and class A for in vitro diagnostics, are the manufacturers. They define all the design, also develop actually a declaration of conformity. So it is the so-called self-declared products, which needs to be assessed by the national competent authorities of the 27 member states. So it depends where the manufacturer comes from. They go to the competent authority of each nationality and they impose over there the declaration of conformity for further assessment. If the products, they are class 2A, 2B, or C, and for the in vitro diagnostic regulation, class B, C, D, then for the conformity assessment route, a notified body, it is always necessary. Notified bodies are private companies, are private legal entities, which are designated by an upper body of European Union to provide conformity assessments for these products. And these are the bodies that they provide you with a so-called certificate of CE, and then you are allowed to sell a product. But which is the roadmap for you that in the most of the cases you are researchers? First, you start designing something into the spectrum of regulatory requirements. Designing means having a design input, and having a design input means that I have the idea how my product would like to look like. Not only as appearance, but which is its functionality, which are the analytical performance, for example, which can be even the appearance, which can be the software requirements, what it's going to do, which is the final intended purpose, which is maybe the stability of the product, which is the life cycle of the product. All of these issues, they need to be considered. Even the labeling and the IFU, the instructions for use, should be also designed at this level of the so-called design input. When I have a design input, I need to have a design output in order to have a product. So my product and all the characteristics and the so-called specifications of my product is the design output. But in order to reach the design output, I have to have the design verification and the design validation. We will see the difference what is between the design verification and the design validation later on. But just to give you a hint, the design validation, it is based on the state of the art and the standards or scientific protocols, while the design verification can be even into the laboratory environment. As long as I have done that, I need definitely to have an ISO 13485. I need to develop processes and procedure which will accommodate my product. I need to have risk management process based on which I need to make a risk analysis, risk evaluation, risk assessment, and risk control measures for my product. And finally, to design a technical documentation, as we mentioned earlier on. The legal manufacturers that they exist into the market, they do not wait for doing firstly the R&D purpose and then to define an ISO 3485, but all the R&D activities are accommodated into the ISO 13485. Not because they want, because it is just imposed by the regulation and the regulatory requirements. As long as I have a concrete R&D, as long as I have a concrete quality management system, then the manufacturer provides the processes, procedures of the QMS related to the product, the technical documentation related to the product, the clinical evaluation of the product, and the post-market surveillance activities. So the CE marking, the so-called CE marking, will be assessed based on the QMS, the technical documentation, the clinical evaluation, the post-market surveillance activities of a product. So there are two regulations. It is as I said, the medical device regulation based on the RABER 2017-745 and the in vitro diagnostic regulation, which is the 2017-746. So for medical devices, we said already the term, we need to appoint the medical device regulation, while for in vitro diagnostics, we need to have a look at the in vitro diagnostic regulation, the 746. And there is now a new regulation for all these aspects, which is the EU regulation for artificial intelligence, or the so-called AI Act. Although the AI Act has been already enforced by the European Union, there are different. They will be finally totally enforced in February 2016. So now it has been started in 2024, 1st of August 2024 to being enforced, and now based on different modules, this artificial intelligence regulation will be enforced slowly until the February 2026. Nonetheless, most of the notified bodies, they have started to take personnel in order to be able to assess products based on artificial intelligence regulation. The artificial intelligence regulation recognizes 100% the medical device and the in vitro diagnostic regulations. It just imposes maybe some extra requirements based on the classification of this of the artificial intelligence module. Okay. Now, from the lab to the sea at a glance, if we are talking about a European project, then you may have a TRL4, that means that you have into a lab environment a proof of concept. Then you may have a TRL6, which means the design verification. The design verification, it is all the tests that they have been performed into usually laboratory environment in order to verify that what you have imagined has been designed, so it works as it has been intended. If the researcher finds that this has been done into a proof of concept and design verification, that means that the design should be locked. And this is very important information for you, because we cannot say that we are ready to get into a product as long as we are still developing and designing the product. In order to go from the verification to the validation status, which means a TRL 8, and then to go for an assessment for a notified body, the design should be locked into the verification level. We need to have a so-called design verification report, and then to include all these processes of design and development and production of the product into the ISO 13485 quality management system. We need to classify our product based on the intended purpose and then started the design validation. For design validation, sometimes different lots, different batches of the same product needs to be produced in order to allow us a proper validation according to the requirements of specific standards. And for the design validation, what the researcher does, it tests the design that it has been designed according to the state of the art, as it should be defined, not as you would like to be designed. And that's why we say which is the role of harmonized standards. But it is not only the role of harmonized standards, it can be even the roles of the common specifications or other international standards. As long as we have passed all these processes from proof of concept to the design validation, then we have, as I said, a legal entity, and we request an assessment from a notified body. The notified body will assess our QMS if it has been designed and developed based on the requirements of the regulations, and of course to assess the technical documentation of the product itself. As long as everything goes well, the notified body issues the CE certificate, and the manufacturer there is able to register the product and to start selling the product into the European Union and to the other markets that they recognize the European regulations. As I said before, don't consider that a technical file is something simple. It can consist of thousands of pages, starting from manufacturer details to different appendices to provide evidence for compliance to the general safety and performance requirements, and not only. It can have physical characteristics, it can have, of course, the design requirements, software requirements, protocol classification, software verification, validation, manufacturing processes, how I do configuration process for software, and I mean, whatever you can imagine, it should be there. Pre-evaluation, preclinical, biocompatibility, etc. Now, a bit more focused to the digital health. Why these regulations, they are important to the digital health? Because nowadays, the most of the digital health systems, they fall into the two medical device regulations, either the MDR or the IVDR, either as standalone or as embedded software. For this reason, it is one of the reasons that the medical device regulation and the in vitro diagnostic regulation have been developed by the European Union in order to accommodate novel technologies. And I would say that still from 2017, these regulations, they are considered quite old, because in 2025, we cannot really accommodate products that they are quite innovative, although they fall into the term of medical device. For this reason, the Medical Device Coordination Group, which is a group of, it's a committee of, it's a group of scientists for different disciplines, that they provide the so-called guidance documents, which enlighten our understanding on the requirements of the medical device regulation or in vitro diagnostic regulation. For digital health specifically, there are quite few. I just put the most important, which provide guidance on cybersecurity, guidance on performance evaluation, how I do clinical evaluation or performance evaluation for my medical device software, how I qualify, how I should say that my software is a medical device or an in vitro diagnostic medical device, and how should I provide traceability to my medical device software, which is very important. It is one of the new requirements of the new regulations. How should I provide traceability to my medical device? The software should have a clear labeling based on these UDI assignments. Having said so, I provide here the Rule 11 under the MDR, which is a new rule. It was not existed previously. It is a new rule which accommodates all the software as medical devices. So if a software falls into the medical device regulation, we really need to go to Rule 11 in order to classify it accordingly. So if a software intends to provide information which is used to take decisions with diagnosis or therapeutic purposes, it is classified as Class 2A by default. And then the regulator has provided other terms how to, based on the understanding of the intended use or based on the intended use of the medical device, to classify it accordingly. A medical device, a software as medical device, or medical device software as it is written into the because the software as medical device, it is more referred to the FDA regulatory system, while the software as medical device, the medical device software, it is the one term that it is mostly used by medical device regulation and in vitro diagnostic regulation. So medical device software is a software that it is intended to be used alone or in combination. That means it can be a standalone system, or it can be embedded, or it can be used in a combination for a purpose as specified, as we said in the beginning, as medical device or in vitro diagnostic. It can be even a software that it is driving or influencing the use of the device. There are in the MDCG 2019, there are a lot of examples how we need to classify based on the intended uses, and it provides different examples of clinic information system, electronic prescription systems, clinical decision support systems, etc., if they can be defined as medical devices or not. This is the illustrative example that the standard it on its own of this medical guidance starts to classify a product if it is a medical device, and if it is a medical device, it is a medical device or in vitro medical device. The scientists, they need to go through this tree in order to define exactly how, if their product is a medical device or in vitro diagnostic medical device. The most illustrative examples that it's provided also by this guidance document are the hospital information systems. In the most of the cases, the hospital information systems are not fall into the medical device term. Because they do not provide diagnosis, they do not provide insight information for a therapeutic purpose, they do not provide monitor to the physiological parameter unless there is an interpretation. They just demonstrate the results of an examination without either diagnose or prognose or providing a decision for a treatment or alleviation of disease. So in this case, the hospital information systems, they are not medical devices. However, they could have modules that they do they are able to fall to the medical device regulation term. In this aspect, this module can fall into the medical device regulation. The decision support software, they are by default, because they take decision for healthcare reason, they are by default medical device products. Of course, they can have multiple intended purposes or simple intended purposes. Similarly to the hospital information system, the information systems and the communication systems, they are not medical devices, as I said before, unless there are modules that they can fall, that the intended purpose of these modules, they can fall to the medical device or in vitro diagnostic regulation. The same it is for the web systems for monitoring of data. If these web systems provide something like an alarm, a warning, or an interpretation of the data, the input data, then they can be medical device. If they just visualize the data or they just communicate the data, these are not medical devices. The same it is for in vitro diagnostics, but the in vitro diagnostic software, they're intended to diagnose information coming from human specimens, something like the digital pathology tools. And of course, the AI systems that they can be integrated either to in vitro diagnostic systems or to medical device software systems. The requirements of a medical device software, they are a lot. And I would like to emphasize that because a lot of researchers, they believe that I have a very secure code. I have designed and developed a very nicely a code, and I have a software that it can be a medical device. Yes, it can be, but the code itself does not consist the whole regulatory requirements for software as medical device. The software needs to be, first of all, classified as per its intended purpose in order to define if it is medical device or not. If it is, then you need to classify it if it is a medical device software or in vitro diagnostic software. It can be combined, both, because it may take information from medical devices and in vitro diagnostic examinations. The other level of classification that you need to do, it is the one that it is now provided by the artificial intelligence regulation. However, an harmonized standard called 62304, it was already mentioned that previously since 2006 that it was developed. So you need to classify also the software based on its intended purpose, but based also on the risk analysis that you will perform for your software system. If it is dangerous, if it can if it can cause injuries which are reversible, or injuries that they are irreversible for the human health. So there are three categories as they are also specified into the artificial intelligence regulation. As long as you have done that, you can start the so-called software development process. The software development process includes the software requirements analysis and the software detailed design, which includes also the software architecture. So you really need to emphasize all these requirements, which, believe me, they are not simple and they are not, and they are a lot. As long as you have done that, you didn't finish with the process. You need to define a software maintenance process. How do you maintain? So you need to have a plan how you will plan to maintain this software. And of course, as I said, to make a risk management, a risk analysis, a risk evaluation based on severity and occurrence, risk control measures, and then reevaluation and the so-called risk assessment. After that, you really need to have the so-called change management. That means that you need to have a software configuration management process to define procedures, how you will plan to change that, which are the impact analysis that you will perform in order to define maybe new requirements, the new code, new algorithms, new modules of the same software, etc., etc. And then to define the so-called software problem resolution process. As long as you have done that, that means that you have a concrete software development process into the quality management system, and consequently, you have a very defined process for a specific product. And this is the software life cycle, which never ends. For software system, it is very important also the so-called cybersecurity and all the data protection, which is imposed by a European regulation, the so-called GDPR, the 2016-679 regulation. But there are also right now, apart from the 27001 and the 27701, that they really guide the software as medical devices, into the information security management systems, there are other international standards which provide you guidance how to develop different software systems in terms of data and information security measures. Going now to the verification and validation, which I think that it is the most juicy part of this presentation, which is the difference. Maybe I have verified that I saw that it works in my environment. Yes, then that you have verified that, you have not validated that. What does it mean, verification? That means that you have designed something right, as it has been intended from the very beginning to be designed based on the intended purpose. However, the validation poses the question, did you design the right device? But what does it mean, did you design the right device? Means that have you designed your device as you wished, or as you wish and according to the regulatory requirements which are imposed either by common specification or other international and harmonized standards. So as I have done that, I do the user needs, I filter the user needs. Based on the user needs, I go to the design input. So I put my first specifications to my product. Then I follow the design process, because based on the design input, I need to have a design plan how my design input should become a design output. Into this aspect, the design verification, it is one of the process. You may need to have different reviews from external people or from internal people of your legal entity, that you will verify at the end that my design inputs, they have been design outputs. If they are not, and you differentiate the design input from the design output, you need to go back to the design input and change the design input. As long as you have verified all these things, you log the design, and this is the so-called medical device, which needs to be validated according to the regulatory requirements. And this is a continuous process. Why? Because a device, it never stays the same for its whole life cycle. It always have differences. It may be changed based either the intended purpose or the intended population, or different technological characteristics may be changed. How do I validate? First of all, I see if there are common specifications imposed by European Union. If there are common specifications, that means that the common specifications, they are regulations on their own that I should fulfill. If there are not, I go I see first of all what is the state of the art. And based on the state of the art, I go to the standards that they impose the state of the art, and then I provide this clinical evidence. So I collect clinical evidence based on the scientific validity and based on different clinical investigations that they may occur, in order to provide the so-called validation. But please be cautious. If you run just a study and you have not logged down your design, these data, they are not considered as design validation. They are still into the verification level. In order to start the validation, you always need to log the design of a product. How you can find the standards? There are thousands of sources that you can find standards. First of all, it is the different communities of standards, like the ISO, the ASTM, the CLSI, the CEN, the CENELEC, the ANSI. European Commission provides also links with the harmonized standards, which is one level up to the other standards that you need to take into consideration. And the Medical Device Coordination Group provides also with guidelines. Although they are guidelines, they are very wise to be used in order to validate the product. And of course, there are different miscellaneous standards that they are come from other regulatory authorities that they are always useful to be used. So as a conclusion, and I would like just to open the discussion for different questions, the MDR, IVDR, they are complicated legal documents that because they are legal documents, this is a challenge for a scientist to understand which are the requirements. If you have a legal entity and you would like to go forward for MDR or IVDR certification, you need resources, a lot of resources, because all of the requirements, unfortunately, they are expensive. The timelines, they are expanded. The regulatory requirements is the same. The new standards, they are coming every day, so you always need to keep an eye on the new standards and new guidance documents. I have to admit that it is quite difficult, however, it's not impossible. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to receive any question if I may answer it.
Thank you so much for your insightful presentation. It was very complete. The information was to the point. So I would like also to give the floor to the audience if any questions are raised. I see Ms. Panagiotis Bamidis' hand raised, so please go ahead.
Thank you for this presentation and the insightful explanation of the whole process, Katerina. I would like to ask you how you have seen it developing, the whole thing. In the last 15 years, this has been an explosion, basically, on what's been happening in this area. We went from no regulations almost to something that is over-regulated. How do you think it's been progressing over the last 50 years?
Thank you for this question, because it is quite interesting to see as you said, the life cycle of this regulatory system, especially in Europe. First of all, I would like to thank you for this honoring invitation, Professor Babidis, to the Evolve2Care consortium. So the medical devices, they were not totally unregulated. I would say that the most of the requirements imposed by the medical device regulation, they were already there. Of course, there are a lot of more right now, and not only to the manufacturers themselves, but the whole system of the regulatory system has a difficulty, because now the regulation imposes requirements to the notified bodies that they were very little in the previous times, to the national competent authorities, but also to the European Union itself, and also to the supply chain, meaning the distributor, all the economic operators, etc., etc. So for medical devices, I would say, yes, we went from the low pyramid to the high pyramid. However, the IVDR, it is the so-called explosion of regulatory requirements. If you consider that 80% of the products existing in the European market, more or less, nowadays they are self-declared products. And now the self-declared products, they may be either class B or C or D products based on the in vitro diagnostic regulation. So for something that it was very less assessed, it's going to be highly assessed, and it needs really clinical evidence to be certified and to be into the market, which imposes a lot of costs to the manufacturers, but also the timeline has been expanded enormously. So I think that the last 15 years that I'm doing this job, we faced the same challenges with the groups that we have been working together. But the main challenge now, it is the resources and the timeline. If a group a team of people would like to have really a product into the market, my experience says that they will find the resources and they will find the whole group of people to work for that and to make this initiative successful. But I saw that Petros would like to pop in on this discussion.
Sure. Thank you.
Hello everybody. Hi, Professor Vanidis. It's a real honor to be here, and congratulations for this kind of initiative. However, just to clarify what Katerina said, or to add to Katerina's suggestion, is that Europe will never become US. So forget about emergency pathways, regulatory pathways, or fast track developmental routes, etc., etc. It's by default the mentality is different. So that means that it will always be harsh to develop and regulate things, no matter the innovation, the grade or the impact of the innovation in Europe. And as Katerina said, IVDs were non-regulated, and they came up from a mess to a really unknown world, which is fully and highly regulated. Medical devices, definitely, they were regulated, but now if you consider softwares within the medical device spectrum, AI within the medical device spectrum, you can imagine that things will still be for the next 5 to 10 years complicated. And our assumption from Switzerland is that European Commission yet has not decided if they will let this multi-factorial, multi-reference point of the notifying bodies to exist as different legal entities, or they will be under a new umbrella similar to EMA, which covers all the pharmaceuticals and the combined products, but mostly directed to cover medical device and IVDs.
Thank you for your insight. Okay. I saw the question in the chat, but you have already answered, I think, Katerina. And I also see Alexandros Moraitopoulos, I get hands up. So the floor is yours for your question.
I'm sorry, did you talk to me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I see your hand raised. Do you have a question?
Yes, hello, Katerina. Thank you very much for the very informative workshop. What I would like to ask is, as a team that tries to build some innovation on medical devices, who has faced many regulatory issues, and which mostly reflect when we seek funding, and etc., where regulatory must be there in order to proceed. What are your, let's say, your hints or your ideas around how we could engage with local regulatory bodies earlier in these development phases, or even collaborate with them, advocate for innovation-friendly policies or whatever? How could we do the next step? Because usually the biggest drawback for us is this: how to manage to get quickly some regulatory compliance so that we can move on. And usually this is the reason why most, let's say, investors will back out, because they know the journey is big and maybe it's too many years in order to be able to complete this journey and make the next step, which is the market step, let's say.
So First of all, you cannot engage regulators for consultancy. That means because it is not allowed. They cannot provide you whatever questions you will impose to them. They will reply with the same question. Unfortunately, we cannot provide this information because we do not provide consultancy. It is your responsibility to know about the requirements. The funding, I know for all the startups, it is a main problem, which that's why I said you really need resources for that. Now, if you have since you said that you have started already this journey, that means that you know more or less the requirements. What we really consult it is that if you don't have a proof of concept, really into your lab, don't start this journey because you may need to go really many times back to your design and to verify your design. As I said to my presentation, the turning point to say that my product can be a product, it is the so-called verification report, even to the lab environment, that you have verified that whatever you have imagined, you have designed it. All the kind of specifications. I'm sure that into the lab environment, you have not inside at all the IFU or the what it's going to be your labeling. If you will be able to do so, please do so. Even the instructions for use and the labeling of a product, it is quite regulatory. I mean, the regulatory requirements of them, they are quite enhanced. So, first of all, make the list of your specifications. Try to prove that into the so-called proof of concept. Try to verify that all the specifications, they can be imposed and they have selected at least some clinical evidence, not based on clinical trials, the so-called clinical, because the clinical trials, it is the so-called clinical investigation should go through competent authorities. Maybe small trials that they can provide you some clinical evidence. As long as you have that, you log the design. This is very important. As I said before, you cannot keep designing and developing something that you would like to certify it and you have not logged the device, because you cannot proceed to the production, to the software release, if we are talking about software, and then to start the validation of the product. The validation, it is this process that will provide inside information that you cover the compliance of the general safety and the performance requirements, not the verification per se. And we have seen a lot of groups of scientists that they would like to bring with a CE certified product, that they have not done the verification. They think that they have a proof of concept, and at the end of the day, they cannot really provide with the specifications that they have designed. This is my let's say advice to that.
So in order to clarify this, what you suggest is but it would be better if we were around tier 7, let's say, in order to initiate all this, right?
No,
Not
if I may,
necessarily. Yeah.
no, if I may, since I'm the older in the company, age-wise. My suggestion, the regulatory aspect is science. That's why it exists as a cluster of regulatory science. And in many universities all around the world, at least in the Ivy League, they do have chairs of regulatory science, meaning that when you are doing research, you have to be part of an institution. But when you are trying to do an applied research and you are creating, let's say, a startup, then you have to involve regulatory scientists. If not, then you cannot guide, respectively, the venture capitalists or the private investors or the private angels, that they don't have this kind of knowledge. And this is the reason that they back up. Whenever they have the information fully clarified and with some approximate cost estimations, we haven't seen any kind of withdrawal of interest. And please do not forget, this is last but not least, quality has to come by design and not later on. Having said so, into the aspect of TRL, usually to our clients, our transfer clients, we are entering to the projects in TRL 3 instead of the TRL 7 that you mentioned before, where we are refusing to enter in such kinds of projects because the mess already is existing there, and then the backwards conflict on confrontation with several parties, it will be definitely presented.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. And there are a lot of questions. I know Katerina has to leave at 4, but of course, Ms. Petrus Malitas will be here to answer all of the questions. So, Ms. Anastasia Valtopoulou, please, I see your hand raised. If you want to add something or we have covered your question.
No, it's something more broad what I wanted to ask. In case someone wants to follow the regulatory affairs path in order to work, for example, in this field, what can someone do in order to do that? Like to work as a regulatory affairs specialist or something?
You mean as an auditor or definitely, I mean, as a consultant, because it's different. They are different. So as a consultant, yes, I mean, you can make a master degrees in quality, being a scientist also to understand, I mean, different sciences, different technologies behind that. I would really advise to work for a company as a quality or regulatory in order to learn some pathways, because you will have a lot of tips behind that. As an auditor, the auditors, they do not have all the codes of the products in their bag. They are really classified auditors to audit, for example, in vitro diagnostics like HIV, HPV testing or glucose meters or whatever. Or let's say that they are in the medical device field, they are in the monitoring devices or implants or radiotherapy devices. So for being an auditor, you really need to have, based on the policies of the most of the notified bodies, 3 to 5 years of experience into a specific medical device manufacturing company or to a medical field of this regulatory, and then to be assigned by them. But as a consultant, yes, I would really advise to have this field of quality and regulatory knowledge. What does it mean? Make a master. As far as I know, there are not PhDs for that, but you can always do something in this aspect, and then to apply for a job. To know how to read policies, how to write policies, procedures, etc.
Okay, thank you very much.
Very welcome.
Thank you. Actually, the time has run out, but and I know Katerina has to leave. So, of course, we will be here for your questions in the chat and for the hands raised as well. And Mr. Malitas can answer. So I would like again to thank Katerina very much for today's insightful session.
I'm happy to receive the list of questions, respond to them, and provide it back to you.
Great, that's great opportunity. If you have any questions in the chat, I will forward them and then let everyone know about the answers. And the presentation, if that's okay, I will share it with the audience after today's session.
And Petros will be here in order to address any of the rest of the questions. Nice to see you all, and thank you for this opportunity. Have a nice evening. Bye.
Thank you so much. So whoever wants to stay for 10 minutes until all the questions are answered, we are happy to be here with you. I had seen a hand raised, but now I cannot see it. So I'm gonna move to the questions in the chat. Can you please elaborate more on the lock of design? How do you do this procedure? This is one of the questions, yeah.
So can you repeat, Konstantina? Sorry.
Yeah. Can you
Yes,
please
yes.
elaborate more on the log of design that Katerina mentioned? How do you deal or do this procedure?
Well, for the design aspect, let's clarify the things. We have three phases of design. We have the proof of concept, then we are moving to the verification, and then we are moving to the validation. Having said so, meaning that we are at Professor Bamides' lab, right? And we're working in a research project. And we come up to, let's say, a publication or a presentation, or we feel confident that, yes, this can go one step forward. As long as you feel like that, so you could say that more or less you have a TRL 1 to 2, then you have the proof of concept, which is supported by relevant literature appraisal, and then you're moving to the verification. Verification meaning the first testing of, in order to identify what is wrong with the design or not. In order to do so, they have to define, according to the international literature, how similar technologies or innovations have been tested, and to try to adapt this kind of testing procedures to this specific phase of the design, of the verification design. As long as you can find results which are more or less repeatable, and reproducible, then you can feel more confident to move on and towards validation, where the design has to be frozen, there's no change, and according to your plans, you have to run your own testing battery versus the state of the art applied in the international methodology. If, for example, you are developing something in cardiology for coronary artery disease, you have to identify, based on the international guidelines, which are the state-of-the-art methodology, which is the state-of-the-art methodology, and this will be in versus your methodology as per your innovation needs. And based on the outcome, the technical finding, the design then is considered completed, and the technical dossier, which includes whatever Katerina has mentioned to her talk, has to be submitted for a 2 stages audit by fully designated notified body. If that was an assistance to the question of the audience.
Thank you. I guess the participant can answer if it's covered, and we have also a very interesting question for the software. For manufacturers that do not develop their own software, but they use subcontractors, what kind of certifications should they seek prior to establishing a collaboration with them? Is it the same for standard software and, for example, an online platform? And thank you for your feedback.
Well, as long as you are planning to develop a medical device, the regulation is quite clear. The whole supply chain has to be part of a medically regulated ecosystem, meaning that this company, the potential subcontractor, has to have a record of developing softwares which have been embedded or a standalone for medical purposes. A. B, that the company per se, and not the outcome of the company, but the company per se, here is working under a specific quality management system, which covers the needs and the prerequisites of the relevant medical medical device regulatory pathway. And third, since we're talking about software and could be relevant to data, that company has to be definitely evidence certified evidence that is well aware of all the preconditions and prerequisites applied to the development of medical device softwares which are related to health-related information. As European Commission is calling it sensitive data. And last but not least, these companies, they have to develop, they have to provide to you, the subcontractors have to provide to you all the evidence of development according to relevant ISO standards. If they know the job, they know their respective ISOs, that they are specifically referred to the scope of that software, so to the type or to the characteristics of this software, and this evidence has to be part of the technical dossier of your product. So if the auditor will come up and say, okay, half of the dossier has been developed by this Chinese manufacturer of software, which is brilliant, but I don't see the evidence that he is well aware to develop medical softwares, then there is an issue. That most of this documentation will not be accepted for the purposes of an audit as per a medical device regulation, not as per high quality software.
Great. Thank you for your answer and your insight. I don't know if Ms. Correa wants to raise another issue, or there are any other questions. I think the discussion could go on, but unfortunately we have run out of time. So one last question, one last remark from either you or Mr. Bamidis, if you want to add something. Otherwise, I would like to thank you very much for today's session and the participation of all of you as well. Just a remark, I don't know, a final goodbye.
My remark is a special thanks to Katerina and Petros for their constant support and collaboration all these years. I think we are benefiting each other on one aspect at least, that we, in this atmosphere of advancing all these ideas and the science parts of each one, I think we also enjoy seeing the developments and trying to see how we could utilize the benefits for the patient, for the professional groups, etc. We also have this in mind. It's been right there from the beginning, and I think in our discussions, and I think it's also the central core message of the Evolve to Care project as well. So thank you very much, Petros, for all this.
It's my pleasure, Professor Bamidis, Konstantinos, and everybody. You always feel free to knock our door to Professor Bamidis and seek for an advice. Just a last remark, since you are referring for a transitional care, and you are more or less young scientists or senior scientists, but not necessarily within the healthcare spectrum. Just be aware to define within certain limits the transitional care needs, which might allow you to promote innovation in an easier or less consuming way of resources, since you are not going to develop something which will be within a hospital or relevant hospitalization needs, and it could be a bit complementary to a home-based disease management. That's as a food for thought. I know that Professor Bamidis and Anthokimos are much more experienced and was not knowledgeable than me. So I have full confidence that soon we will hear fruitful things from your side.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a great point. Thanks again, and thank all of the participants.